Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Alchemist ePermits webinar on the topic of permit to work from home. I'm just noticing we're still getting people joining at the moment, so I'm just going to give it a minute or so as the numbers keep racking up. When the numbers slow down, we'll get started. So just bear with us, please, for 1 minute. Okay, we seem to have slowed down in attendees joining. So again, welcome everybody to the Alchemist ePermits webinar, this month entitled Permits to Work from Home. Just a couple of housekeeping bits first. If anybody has any questions during the process, there is a questions tab on your little dashboard that you have there for GoToMeeting. By all means, type in the questions and my colleague Neil will be aggregating them all up so that we can then answer them at the end of the session for you. So please feel free to ask any questions that you have as we go through the process. Okay, so what are we looking at? We're looking at the ability of being able to remotely manage the permit process. Electronic systems allow you to do this. ePermits allows people to create permit requests, approve permit requests, issue permits and close permits on different devices, in different places, and if necessary, at different times. For some activities, it's not always possible to do different places. Some very high risk activities, you need to actually physically be in the same place at the same time. And there are many activities, particularly in the PPM space and low risk activities, where you can issue permits, close permits without needing to be in the same place as the contractor at that time. So circumstances don't need to dictate the process, and you can still maintain compliance. And COVID restrictions in particular are causing most of the issues. Staff could be on enforced absence through self-isolation, but they could still do their tasks. They could still issue permits or even close permits from their home if necessary for those types of activities. Very often there is an ability to physically be on site, but not being able to do that doesn't need to affect the management of the process or the ability to be compliant. So let's just run it through a scenario and see how this type of system can assist in this process of remote management of permits. The first stage is always that the contractor is going to raise a permit request. They need to say what it is they're going to do, where they're going to do it, how they're going to do it, and so forth. Typically, it can be generated by a telephone conversation. So you contact the appropriate contractor, you tell them what task needs doing. They can then complete a permit request and get ready to issue that and send it through to you. Now, the permit system will manage it with a number of different modules. This looks like a quite complicated picture, but I'll just take you through elements of it. There are 4 core modules in the ePermit system. The first one is called Permit Workflow, and this manages the workflow process. So permits are requested, requests are then issued and sent to the appropriate people for approval. Once they've been approved, the permit is then, the contractor is advised that the permit has been approved. And when they turn up, the permit can be issued. When the job's finished, the permit can be closed. And all documentation, risk assessments, permits, and so forth can be stored within the system. The system will also hold an audit trail. So you can see who did what, where, and when in that permit process. Reporting obviously enables you to access information for audit purposes or management reporting purposes. And the important task that gets done in this area is what we call clash checking. If I'm coming in to do a particular piece of work for you, when you receive that permit request, the system will flag up any activities that may be clashing with that permit request that I'm putting in. So have I got people working in the same place at the same time? Have I got other jobs scheduled on that same piece of equipment at the same time? So that's how Permit Workflow manages it. There are then some compliance modules, risk assessments and method statements. Risk assessments and method statements, as you know, are necessary for any job that's going to be conducted, and they should therefore be submitted in advance. RAMs can be submitted through the ePermit system linked in with products like SciPol for doing cost assessments. If I'm going to be using, for example, any materials, adhesives for putting floor tiles down, or chemicals for doing cleaning, they can all be added into that risk assessment. That risk assessment is submitted, and again, through a workflow process, managed and signed off and approved by people within your organization, and then held within a management system, which will put things like timeframes around them. So RAMs are valid for 12 months from the date of approval, for example. There's a contractor compliance module. Many people may be aware of a product called Safe Contractor, again from Alchemist. This can be integrated within the permit system so that you can find your approved contractors through Safe Contractor, and then use that information to drive the permit creation and approval process directly from that system. Key things we're looking at are insurance checking. Are the insurances in place for that contractor at the time of the permit is being requested? And probably the most important one is what we call worker compliance. This takes it one step down from the contractor company and looks at individuals from that contractor company who are going to turn up on site. They are properly trained, qualified, inducted, any security checks or eligibility to work in the UK checks are all done within the system. Now, because the system is doing all this for you, you actually don't need to be present in, for example, the office to go and pull out RAMs out of a drawer and check them. You don't need to go to another drawer to pull out details about the contractor to make sure that they are accredited to do the type of work that they're coming in to do. And you don't need to go to yet another drawer to pull out information about the individuals to check that they've got the right training and competency and it's all current. So the system enables all that level of remote working without needing to do that. There are other elements within the system that will enable you to pull all of that information in. That's better. We have electronic signatures. This is another element that allows remote activity. I don't need to actually physically sign a permit and hand my pen and paper over to the contractor for them to physically sign it. We can electronically sign it on different devices. We can check and add PPE to a list. Yes, PPE is specified on a RAMS, but at the moment you have specialist requirements that are time-phased. You want all contractors to wear glove and face masks in order to be COVID compliant on site. You can use the permit module, the PPE module within the permit system to specify any site-specific or time-specific PPE that you require your contractors to do. And similarly, another remote activity is the induction. If a contractor hasn't been inducted, what they need to do is obviously they turn up on site, you need to put them into the security office, they need to go through an induction. It's now possible to do those inductions prior to coming to site through the e-permit system. So a contractor identifies that one of his colleagues who's coming on the job hasn't been inducted on site, or the induction has expired. That colleague can actually do the induction on the e-permit system. He'll watch a video, for example. Behind that video will embed a number of your questions, so maybe 100 questions in 5 groups of 20. The system will randomly pick 3 questions out of each group, and you've got to score 14 out of 15 to be inducted. So all of that can be done again now prior to the contractor arriving on site. No need for that contractor to interface with you or be in a place, in a confined space where they're handling equipment, touching equipment, and so forth. So the process then for the permit request by the contractor with those sort of modules in place is that contractors contacted. If you've got the RAMS compliance module, the system asks, do RAMS pre-exist for the job? If they do, then you can move forward. If they don't, then the contractor has to create risk assessments and method statements, submit them to you for approval, and only once they've been approved can they move on to the next step. So the contractor creates that permit, and the system will create permits for depending on the type of work doing. So there's always what we call an access permit at the root. And then if I'm going to be doing, for example, welding in a confined space, I would have a hotworks permit and a confined space permit within those. The system will then check if the contractor themselves are compliant. If you're using Safe Contractor that is already done for you in advance, but it will check that the company details are compliant. And if, for example, insurances are out of date, it will warn the contractor. They will need to provide you with evidence that those insurances have been updated prior to turning up to do the work. So this is all still remote. This is all still right at the beginning in the request process. The contractor is warned of what they've got to do. Finally, when you're looking at worker compliance, it'll check all the training and competency of the individuals that are named on that permit. If they're all trained, qualified, inducted, and so forth, then that permit request is complete. The benefit to you at your end is that when you receive a permit request, you will know it's compliant because everything's been checked. There are valid RAMs in place for the task. The contractor company is properly insured and is an approved contractor of yours, and everybody named on that permit is properly trained, qualified, and inducted. That task has been done for you. You do not need to go and do any more checks on those activities. So the contractor then requests that permit, as we saw. It's done all the compliance checks. It's checked all the RAMs, training, insurance, PPE, and so forth. And what happens now is that that permit request, when it's submitted, is routed to different people within your organization. Whether they're in the office or not, doesn't matter. You could, for example, as we said, be in a situation where you might be on self-isolation. You may not be ill, but you could still do a task, but you have to be homebound. You could still look at things like access permits. You can still look at the information enclosed on that permit about clashes, and you still have an input into whether or not that permit should be approved based on other activity taking place on site. So access permits will go, for example, for the site manager. Confined space permits might go to someone in health and safety, and hot works will go to a number of different people. Technical responsibility, engineering, possibly the site manager as well. And in addition, if you're doing hot works, you may need to have an isolation. So someone within the business will also need to have access to that information and create an isolation permit. So before the hot works is going to be done, we're going to have to isolate the fire alarm devices in that particular area. So once all of those permits then have been approved, the contractor will be advised that yes, they can now turn up at the appointed time and do the task that's on the permit. So everything at the moment done remotely. Contractor working from their place to submit the permit request, you working from wherever you are within your organization or potentially even at home, approving those permits, and then the contractor receiving notification back at the office that they can come in and do that particular piece of work. So the approval process, again, access permits are routed to the appropriate people for approval. If there are high-risk permits required, then they'll go through the route of checking for high risk, whether there are isolations required. Once they've all been approved, they are then submitted and information will go back to the contractor. If you don't have any high-risk permits, so for example, I'm coming in to do some decorating, it'll just go straight through the process. Once the access permit has been approved, then everything will go through. So it applies to any type of permit request, any type of activity that's going on.
Richard,
okay. Yeah.
Richard, quick question, and we'll take these as they come in. We've had a couple come that are probably worth taking now. So first one is, how can you be certain the individual contractor completes the induction and not somebody else if it is done remotely?
Okay. The way the induction process works on the remote induction is that if I work for a specialist contractor, my name's on the permit, and Richard De Silva has been flagged up as not having been inducted. Within the permit system, Richard De Silva is logged in there, and I will have something like my email address. So I've actually got a unique identity. If I go to the permit system, I don't need to log into it, but on the front screen there's a button that says watch video. Once I click on that, what the system does, it says, okay, input your name. So I'd input my name. System checks that I'm valid within the list of people for that particular contractor, and then it will issue me a token that will arrive via my email. And that token is what I put in. So it's the same way that you would check or go through some of the checks to get onto your banking system. You'll get a notification that comes through on your phone, and you input that number, and the system then effectively knows that it's you. So then you go through the process, you do the activity, and if you pass, it will update my record. Now, yes, I could be sitting in my room with someone sitting next to me. I've input the information, and then I pass the keyboard over to that individual person, and they complete it for me. There is no way that you can check against that. You could start thinking about having cameras switched on and checking that the person doing the task in front is actually the person that is supposed to be doing the task. Similar way when you do things, anything like, sometimes, I don't know if anybody's been on one of those speed awareness courses, but they do a similar type of thing there. No, I haven't, just before anybody else. But you have to sort of show a photograph of yourself or your driving license, and then the camera is on all the time. So you can have that element of control if you want to. Does that help? Oh, sorry, one other thing. The questions at the end, once I've watched the video, actually give some evidence that not the video has just been watched, but it's actually been understood, because you set a pass mark. So I will get various questions presented to me. I will answer those questions, and I have to reach a certain level to be deemed to pass. If I fail, I have to do the whole process again. And the system will log every time a failure happens. So you can have a record of, guess what, this guy, Richard De Silva, had to do the induction 10 times before he passed. That's a bit risky. We're not quite sure if we want that guy on site or not.
Okay, thanks, Richard. Just one other real quick. You say all submissions will be checked. Who carries out the checks?
What submissions?
That's all it says in the question.
Oh, okay. If we're talking about the permit requests, so when the system is set up, you, the client, we set up whatever your workflow process is within the system. So if, for example, the site manager can approve access permits and hotworks permits only, that's what goes in the system. So when a permit is requested for hotworks, that person will receive that request through an email notification that they can then log into the system and go through the process of approval. So only people that you deem the correct people to receive permit requests for the different types of activity will actually receive them. When I log into the system as an approver, so I can approve hotworks permits, I log into the system as that approver. The system knows who I am and what my permissions are, and so I can then go and approve that permit. If I didn't have permission to approve hotworks permits, I could still see it on the screen, but my password would not allow me to approve that permit. So only valid people can approve those permits, and it's audit trailed as to who actually approved that permit based on the logins and so forth of the individuals.
Great. Thank you, Richard, for doing that. Apologies for the interruption. You've got a contractor who's just arrived on site.
Yes, that's right, indeed. Thank you very much. And by all means, please throw in questions as they come up. It's far more pertinent they get answered for you while it's fresh in your mind. So the contractor now arrives on site. It's 8:30 on the 17th of May, as if they turn up the day before because they just happen to be in the area, you send them away. The system will also enable you to produce lists of permits for example, tomorrow. So you can run a list of all tomorrow's permits. You can put it down to the permit office, and on there will be a permit number, the name of the contractor, and the name of all the individuals on the permit. So you can cross-check them. Anybody that turns up that's not on the list, you send them home, because they're going to turn up and try and do a job. You don't know if that's going to clash or add added risk to your business. So contractor turns up, and the first thing that we want to do in this process is this PPE check. So on the screen that's presented to the permit office, that will allow the contractor on site. There'll be listed things such as helmet, safety boots, high-vis jacket, safety specs, as you can see. That for welding and brazing, we're doing the gauntlets and the visors. For the work at height, I'm going to be needing a harness for some hanging off the side of the building, whatever. You can also, in that approval process, you can change and edit that PPE list that's come from the contract. So, for example, helmet, safety boots, and high-vis jacket might be default for everybody that's going to come on site. Your rule says anybody bringing a toolbox on site, got to have helmet, boots, and jacket. Once that permit request comes through in the approval process, you can actually review that PPE list, and you can say, actually, because of COVID, I'm going to add gloves and face masks. We'll provide the gloves and face mask, and you put a note on the permit document that says face masks and gloves will be provided when you arrive on site. You must wear them at all times on site and dispose of them in the appropriate bin provided when you exit. That will appear on the permit document, and the contractor is signing up to all that information on the permit document when they receive that permit. And we'll show you how that happens next. Then we go through a process of, for example, electronic signatures. This can be done on a tablet, smartphone, iPad, iPhone, whatever device, as long as you have access to an internet browser. So the approved person or the person that's going to issue the permit can sign that permit, and then the contractor can sign acceptance of that permit at that point or at that time of issue. So I'm standing there in the permit office, the issuer signs it, and I sign for receipt of it. It could be on the same tablet or not. Remote issue can be done if there is no AP available on site. So if it's a job where it's just physically impossible for you to actually be on site to issue that permit, I can go through a process with, if there's a safety checklist to go through, I can open up my phone video. You can be sitting at the other end on the screen watching that video. Together, we now go around the process doing that safety checklist. Once that safety checklist has been done, and you're the person ticking the things off, not the contractor. Once that safety checklist has been gone through, then you can sign that permit to issue it, and the contractor can sign for receipt. And they can be done on different devices. So I might sign it on my desktop computer, for example, if I'm sitting in the office or even at home. And the contractor could sign it on their smartphone or their tablet actually at the place of work. Same thing happens for closure as well. Now, how is that carried out? Here, for example, this is how electronically the issuer would sign that permit. So when it comes to the point of signature, there's a signature box that can appear, and that can be signed either with a pen on a USB stick or a touch screen, whatever process you want to go through. When the contractor needs to sign, there's two steps, or it can be two steps. Firstly, if you're not in the same place at the same time, or as some of our clients are doing with regard to COVID compliance, they will not be less than 2 meters from the contractor. You can click this button. This will then forward this a link to the team leader for the contractor. When they open that link, the screen appears, and they can then sign on their own device. And then when they click the save, they have signed the permit, and so has the issuer. That permit can now be issued. Next step in the process. Sometimes you'll require dynamic risk assessments or last-minute risk assessments to be done. So dynamic risk assessments can be completed either on paper or electronically. And at the end of the job, if it's electronic, you can upload the saved file to the permit bundle, or you can scan a piece of paper and scan it and upload it to the permit bundle for the job, so you have the record. Now, one of the things you may have seen on all that bubble diagram earlier on was that we have links to another Alchemist solution called Information Exchange. Information Exchange has a number of applications, such as audits and inspections, risk management, accident incident reporting, and so forth. All of these are key elements that happen in job. so they can be completed using that application, then uploaded into the e-permit system. So that integration is going to be coming over the next months, where you can fill in something, you can call up IEX from the e-permit system, fill in the dynamic risk assessment, save that dynamic risk assessment, and it's time-stamped and audited in the e-permit system that it was completed at this time, i.e. prior to the job actually starting. So again, all done remotely without having to have people in contact with each other. So once they've been completed, the next is going to be going through those safety checklists that we talked about. And safety checklists appear on a permit as such. Whatever the list of checklists that you want to go through or you want your contractors to go through get replicated onto the permit document. So this document here is actually a representation of just our standard template. The template can be branded to you, or you can provide us with what your current permits look like. They'll be recreated within the system, and then what gets spat out at the back end of the process looks and feels exactly the same as you do now. So you can see from here that you're able to tick that safety checklist, and we were talking earlier on that I could be ticking these boxes at my desk while the contractor's going around with his phone at the time and we're checking them off. An added measure, I can request that that contractor emails me that video. I can then also upload that video into the system. So I can have a video or a photographic record of the place of work before the work started. And similarly, we could go through the same process when we close the permits off to store a record of what the place of work looks like at the end of the process. Here you can see a finished document where it shows it was approved by this guy Howard at 10:03. It was issued by Howard at 12 minutes past 10. It was collected by that team leader 1 minute later, and then it was returned by Steve 5 minutes later and signed off by Howard at the same time. So you can see this is a completed permit document with a record of everything on there from PPE, it's done all the safety checklists, it's got information about any isolations, it's got information about the job, and it's got everything time-stamped and audit trailed. So permits can be then issued, and the workflow process for the issuing is exactly the same as we've gone through. First thing to check, is the contractor on today's list? If they're not, send them home. Are the people on the permit present? You will often get situations where the two people named, for example, two people named on the permit, one of them isn't one that's turned up. The other guy's off sick. So if that situation arises, you can then change the team. So by selecting the change team functionality, it allows you to change the name of any individuals on that permit. If you have the compliance module, the worker compliance module, the system will then automatically rerun all of the training and competency checks on that new person. If that new person, for example, needs an induction, they can do the induction. If they've all passed, if they pass all the training and competency checks, you can allow that job to go on. If they don't, send them away. You check the PPE module. Have they got the correct PPE for the tasks? If they haven't, send the contractor away. If you've got the electronic signatures module, you can electronically sign this either at the place of work or remotely, and you can then issue the permits. If you don't use electronic signatures, you print a blank copy of the permit, and then you go through the wet signature process all the way through. At the end of the session, at the end of the process, you'll need to have that document returned to the permit desk. That would then get scanned and uploaded into the permit system. So when the work is now finished, you need to go through a close audit. Very similar to maybe doing dynamic risk assessments, there's a close audit process within the permit system. And finally, those permits will then be closed off, signed again by the contractor handing it back first, and then signed again by the person that's authorized to close that permit off. You do not necessarily need to be at the same place at the same time. I do appreciate, as I said earlier, there are some very high risk activities where it's imperative that the person that's going to sign the permit off is in the same location at the same time as the contractor. There are many tasks where it is not absolutely necessary to do that. So all the permits are then signed off, everything's audit trailed, and everything is then all bundled together and held within the permit system, showing the permit documents, any associated documents with it, such as risk assessments, method statements, accident incident reports, audits and inspections. If you run an inspection on your contractor, maybe you'll do random inspections every now and again, just to check they're adhering to the RAMs, working in the right place and so forth. You can, again, add those sort of inspections to it at the time. What that means is when you have an audit, you have your annual audit, you can actually give your auditors access to the e-permit system with just read-only permissions to the reporting system. So they can then access the information about jobs that were done, they can see the audit trail, they can see what was done, who was doing the work, and everything had gone through due process and everything was compliant.
So
closure
Richard,
process. Yep.
Sorry, just a quick question on the audit
Sure.
process. Jim was asking earlier if the system allowed you to carry out an audit trail, which you've just answered, but he also said, i.e. via a pre-agreed set of questions loaded onto it post-works. Yep. So can you load?
There's potentially two interpretations of that question. I'll cover them both. Firstly, can you produce pre-written audits that you will then go around with your smartphone and you just go around the process and tick those things off? Yes, pre-structured audits can be configured, not within the e-permit system. You would use either an alternative audit tool or the IEX audit tools that are available through the Alchemist product. Configure those, call them up through the e-permit system. That will then appear on your screen. You go through that audit, and then when you press the completed button, it will then get appended to the permit bundle as a record against that job. The other potential interpretation of that was post closure. So when a job is finished by the contractor and they've gone home, you may not close that job off until Monday. If it was done on Saturday, it's low risk work. A guy came in to install a vending machine. You won't close that permit off until you're in the office on a Monday. You go down to have a look at the place of work, and guess what? They've left all of the polystyrene packing in the corridor. That was against the RAMs. It's against the instructions that the contractors are given that they must take away all things at the same time, all the waste product. And the ways you can approach that, you can either have a standard audit template, which is already existing within the e-permit system, that says at the end of it, did the contractor do things properly? Were there any safety risks? Were there any risks to the infrastructure of the building? And there's areas there for you to put in what they did wrong. You can take photographs and you can upload. So I could log against that contractor. I can photograph the polystyrene packing in the corridor. I can upload that with some notes against that permit, and it goes as a record against that permit document. But it also files it as a non-compliance against the contractor. So when you have your contractor reviews and my company is due to come in, you can run a quick analysis within the permit system, and you can say, okay, guys, last year you did 24 jobs for us. 23 times this guy, Richard De Silva, was on the permit, and we had problems. So guess what? We are now accessing the e-permit system, and we're putting a cross against his name. He is not able to come onto any permits on this site again. You, the contractor, can come on, but you just can't put that guy on the permits again. We don't want him on site. So you have a range of abilities for monitoring and keeping records of contractor compliance through the jobs that they do, accessible from the permit system. So if it isn't a fixed question set, it's something that's just happened, you can write notes, you can upload photographs to support that. If it is something you want to go through every time, it's a fixed set of questions, you can configure those questions on an audit tool.
Thank you.
So hopefully what we've been able to show you there is just that using electronic systems, obviously e-permits as a prime example, things can be done without having to be physically in the same place at the same time, all the way from the initial process of contacting the contractor to say, I need you to raise a permit, raising that permit, sending that permit to the different people that need to approve those permits, issuing those permits once they've been approved, and then finally closing them off. It is possible to go through that whole process without two people ever meeting together. Not necessarily ideal, but possible in situations such as we have at the moment, where you may need additional precautions to be COVID compliant. So if there are no further questions, we'll wind up the webinar at this point. The webinar is, of course, recorded, and everybody that's attended and actually everybody that actually registered for the webinar will receive a link to the webinar. My contact details are on the screen. If anybody has any particular interest in either aspects of what we've discussed today, or interested in even considering how an electronic permit system may work for yourselves, by all means, please do contact me at any time, and I look forward to hearing from you. So thank you very much again for your attendance, and we'll hopefully speak to some of you fairly soon. Bye-bye.